Because of the way that Spinoza's ethics was written, it's best to watch the previous parts of the series first, because all of Spinoza's ideas build on top of one another. If you haven't, I have no doubt that you'll still get something out of this video, but you'll probably get a lot more out of it if you watch the first 3 parts linked here. We're going to be starting off with the idea of enslavement, but probably not in the way that you're thinking. We can't be the full and only cause of all of our actions because we have to use and rely on other things in our lives. Lots of times, those external things are more powerful than us and can destroy us. The number of things that can kill you is basically unending. Just think, about 13 people die every year by vending machines. Come on guys, how does that even happen? The effects are some type of external cause that acts on you. Whenever I said enslavement earlier, I didn't mean having someone else control you, rather having these external causes control you. Spinoza says that a man is enslaved when he lacks the power to get the effects fully under his control. This enslavement is exactly what causes people to do things that are bad for them. The enslavement to the desire for nicotine leads to an addiction to cigarettes, even though you know that they're killing you. So if people are constantly being determined by their effects, what does that say about good and evil? Let's first take a step back. To Spinoza, everything that we see and interact with is a mode of what he calls God, but can also be called the universe, cosmos, nature, or any other like term. Don't let the term God hang you up too much. He doesn't mean this sort of God. Therefore, nothing is inherently good or evil because everything is just a mode of God. Things simply are what they are in God's perspective, since everything is a part of and flows from him as the first cause. To finite modes like you and I, which are at the end of this long chain of causality, this isn't the case though. We finite modes are constantly interacting with other finite modes. So good to a finite mode is something that we like or desire. And evil is something that we hate, so we avoid it. Music is great when you're out with your friends. But the exact same song is the last thing you want to hear when it's 4 a.m. and you're just trying to sleep. And to someone deaf, it's neither good nor bad. His theory of good and evil all relies on the relationships to other things. Spinoza says that anything good is what we know for a fact to be useful to us, and anything evil is something that would prevent us from doing good. So why isn't everyone just good all the time then? It sure does sound pretty easy. The problem is that most of the time we don't have a full, or what Spinoza calls adequate, knowledge about what is good for us, so we're uncertain about good and evil. Instead, we form judgments of good and evil based on the way we associate the images in our minds with external causes, the effects. From that full, adequate knowledge, we're able to be the adequate cause of the things that we do. Being the adequate cause means that an action is caused by ourselves alone and nothing else. So if I were to ask you to like the video, then you would no longer be the adequate cause. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Spinoza says that these adequate actions have to be good for us because they come from our very essence, causing our essence to grow and our power to act adequately in the future to increase. This leads us into virtue, but not this kind of virtue. Instead, virtue is our power to act completely from our nature alone. And what is our nature, you might ask? Well, it's simply just to continue on living and being human. In other words, virtue is our capacity to act completely by ourselves, without being determined to do something by external causes. So a person is more virtuous the more that they're the full cause of the things that they cause, and less virtuous the more that they are acted on by external things. The more passive you are to effects, meaning the more you let them affect you, the less virtuous that you are. This goes in a downward spiral. As you decrease in virtue, it makes you more open to external influences, which decreases your virtue, and on and on. Virtue is really the key to Spinoza's ethics and this whole entire series. Speaking of, if you guys are enjoying this series and you want to see more philosophy content, then please consider subscribing if you haven't already. It might help to think about it this way. You understand rationally, so you have adequate ideas. And leading from those adequate ideas, you are the adequate cause of your actions. Given this, we are only able to act with virtue insofar as we have adequate ideas. Acting from virtue is acting, living, and preserving our being by the guidance of reason. Not only does adequate knowledge lead us to increase our virtue, but Spinoza also says that it's the best source of joy in our lives. So if reason is what leads us to adequate knowledge, and that is the ultimate source of joy, then what prevents us from just being reasonable and happy all the time? As I mentioned earlier, people are powerfully affected and determined by external causes, which to us are experienced as the images and feelings in our minds. Since virtue is at its core a striving to continue living, we're determined to seek the things most useful and advantageous to us. Again, one's own nature or essence, these terms are used pretty interchangeably here, is to continue being. So death and destruction can never come from our essence alone. Therefore, Spinoza says that suicide can never be virtuous, and that anyone who commits suicide is, these words are his, not mine, weak-minded and completely conquered by external causes contrary to their own nature. This isn't the last time that Spinoza is coldly rational. Everything that I've said so far sounds pretty selfish, don't you think? If everyone's just trying to do what's best for themselves, how does society work? You may or may not remember common notions from the earlier videos. Common notions refer to a finite mode's need to interact with things whose nature is similar to their own in order to gain rational knowledge. Because you've had so many interactions with climbing a ladder, you have a pretty good idea of where the steps are, where you need to grab, or generally just how to do it. Or not. Spinoza says that this is the best way to build adequate ideas, rational knowledge, and therefore virtue. Nothing in our world has absolutely nothing in common with us. All physical things agree in the fact that they're a part of the attribute of extension, and that they are constantly in a state of motion or rest. The more something agrees with our nature, the better it is for us. So by this logic, spending time with other humans must be good for us because they share the most in common with our natures. I mean, come on, you're bound to get more out of a conversation with another person than your desk lamp. But of course, not everyone is good for us. The more someone is subject to the passions, the more that they differ in nature and are contrary to one another. So, the more someone lives according to reason, the more they do what's good for themselves and human nature as a whole. But now we're back to the original question. Why does Spinoza say that we're doing what's good for human nature? I thought we were just doing what's good for ourselves. Human nature to Spinoza is just what our bodies have in common. And obviously, you have more in common with other humans than you do a whale, insect, or rock. Unless it's the Rock. You know, our old friend Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Come on, he had to make another appearance. Basically, when people have more rational knowledge, then they better understand the nature of both their own bodies and other human bodies in general, so they know what's good for them and other humans. The difference between this and selfishness is that when we're selfish, we're just doing what we believe to be advantageous to us, while if we're truly being virtuous, we're acting from an understanding of what's good for ourselves and others. Furthermore, a community as a whole is able to do more physically and mentally, increasing our adequate ideas, so it can never be good to harm another human, because by doing that, we'd be reducing the power of something truly useful to us, decreasing the possibility of building a rational community. Harming someone isn't really bad for any other reason than that it would go against your own advantage. So a bad person isn't morally bad, instead, they're just bad at being a person. You can't ever be 100% good or bad though, because you have to have some rational knowledge and will always be affected by external things to some degree. So you'll always fall somewhere in the middle of this continuum. In a perfectly rational community, there would be no need for laws because everyone would be doing what's best for themselves and for everyone else around them. But as we know, this is not the case. A civil state and laws are needed to prevent people from harming each other, or in other words, to manage the behaviors of those that are prone to act on their effects. Laws are really just necessary fictions to moderate the effects of irrational people and to promote their virtue. This all requires another fiction to even work though, and that is free will. Free will is a necessary fiction to make people responsible and accountable for their actions. This brings up an interesting point about responsibility. An evil person isn't responsible for his badness. Rather, they're just weak in mind and body.
Are you sure that's the person? There's no doubt in your mind. Take your time.
They live irrationally, easily being swung around by the passions like a rag doll, always relying on external things for quick, fleeting joys. Could everyone just take the insanity defense for their bad acts then? Is becoming virtuous just a matter of fate and chance then? Since there's no free will, is it all really just luck? People are good or evil by necessity. What does it matter if a murderer was responsible for his wickedness? Yes, he caused another man to die. Nobody is saying that he didn't. It's just he didn't do it freely or intentionally. He was necessitated to do it by external causes, but that doesn't make him any less dangerous or bad. He still needs to be punished so that stronger effects prevent him from doing it again in the future. Just as a tsunami causes, but is not morally responsible for, destroying a village, a murderer causes, but is not morally responsible for another's death. Do I even need to... no? Okay. Spinoza asks us, why is it deemed acceptable to relieve our hunger and thirst with food and drink, but not relieve our melancholy with joy? A wise man takes pleasure in things in moderation to meet all of the needs of both his mind and body. Spinoza's ethics, drumroll please, I know this is what you've all been waiting for, is really an ethics of joy. Whatever increases the joy of our mind and body is therefore ethically good. A rational person will accept that suffering, like all things, is necessary, and strives to not let that fact diminish his own being. Someone who strives only for passive joys will flourish when they're satisfied, like when he has money, food, or drink, but it will be easily diminished when those things aren't present. That is why we need to seek active joys, which don't rely on external things, but instead just arise from our nature alone. So ultimately, our goal is to become more rational, to gain more adequate ideas, to gain more true understanding of our essence, so that we can be more virtuous and powerful, doing what is good for both ourselves and for humanity. Let's go back to the idea of enslavement once more. A free man is one who's not enslaved to the effects, is active and rational. He does only what he knows to be important in his life. He follows the greater of two goods and the lesser of two evils. This person would sacrifice a lesser present good for a greater future good. They have honesty and honor and strive to increase the rationality of others as well. To come back to our favorite Spinozian analogy, if people are like waves on the sea, a free person is one who strives not to be affected by being tossed about and instead strives to understand his position as a wave on the sea. The right way to live, then, is based on understanding what we are and on understanding and doing what is good for our being. Thanks for watching. Remember to keep thinking deep and living well. I'll see you guys in the next and final part of Spinoza's Ethics Explained.